Well, welcome everybody to the first episode of our podcast here. Bear with us while we kind of go through a bit of a clown show that this will probably be for the first few episodes. I'm Eric Bruns. I'm the owner of Vonnier Wealth Strategies, which is a financial planning firm that works with real estate professionals, helping them turn their financial assumptions into facts. And with me is my buddy, Stephen Brock. Stephen, go ahead and take a bow.
Hey, I'm Stephen Brock. I'm going to take a bow.
Into the screen.
Yep. So, Stephen Brock with Family Mortgage. I am a loan originator here in the Palm Beach County and throughout Florida.
All right. So Stephen and I both decided for some reason or another to join the Army back in our day. And that's how kind of we met later on as veterans. And for better or for worse, you're kind of stuck with us going forward here as we go through some fun financial stuff that we wish that you knew, and you probably wish that you know as well. So today for our first episode, we wanted to talk about, should you really consider your primary home an investment? Now, this is something that maybe some people think is a semantic argument, something along the lines of you're just worried about words. But to me, what we call stuff matters. And whatever we title something tends to affect how we approach it and the behavior that we exhibit when approaching it. So, Stephen, if we're asking you, like, hey, should your primary home, what's your thought? Should it be considered an investment or something else?
Well, I don't want to get it confused with, can you turn your primary home into an investment property? So again, now you're saying with the words, like it really matters what you're looking at with it. So more or less, we're talking, can your primary home become an asset or an investment to your wealth building side of things?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Well, look at that. It got dark really quick in here. There we go.
Oh, you guys didn't pay the electricity bill, huh?
There you go. Yeah. Wasn't moving enough. You're talking too long. So I really wanted to focus more on how we look at it as, you have to live somewhere. You can't just live under a bridge. Mm-hmm. If you're trying to build wealth, what is it actually meaning with your primary home? And we all know that it's not liquid. You can't just pull the money out of that house. So you have to think about it in investment terms is what investments do you consider that are, liquid or that are considered that are a hard asset that take a while to pull the money out kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, oftentimes, and I think it stems from kind of the statistics you hear a lot out there is most Americans, their primary home is their biggest asset. So a lot of people kind of go in thinking, ooh, I could buy this house. We're in Palm Beach County here, so maybe I got to use some higher numbers to be realistic. Maybe I can buy this house for $500,000. And in 10 years, it's going to be worth more than $1 million. Ooh, that's an awesome investment. I'd be foolish not to do that. Now, when I'm working like with clients and we're figuring out like their net worth, their balance sheet, what I like to do is when we're talking about your primary home is we like to kind of list it as a use asset. It's not really an investment. It's not money we're trying to pour in to gain. It's like you said earlier, it's providing an actual use. It's a service. It's something that you need going forward that could provide stability. And the fact that maybe the overall value increases over time is a nice perk. But I think, like you said, if we start talking about it as an investment, a lot of people might start making potentially bad financial decisions and buying maybe a bigger house than they need because they think it will appreciate more, buying the bigger house as opposed to the smaller house because of all those dollar signs that maybe get in their eyes. And that can lead to kind of some bad things because a lot of people don't think a lot of times about the ancillary costs that go into a primary home.
A lot of people think, oh, I'm going to put a pool in because it's going to add value. Yes, adding a pool to your house will add value to it, but the cost of putting that pool in is not going to outweigh that value. You put that pool in to use it kind of thing. So the same thing, like you're buying this house to use it to live somewhere because if you're going to be somewhere for 3, 4, 5 years plus, it is smart to buy a house because you can get your money back out of it instead of renting, where, renting, you definitely are going to be losing money. But if you're only going to be there a year, maybe 2, it might be smart to rent kind of thing. So it's not always the right time to buy kind of thing. So, depending on your situation.
Now, when you're talking to somebody, Stephen, if they're coming to you and you're advising them on the mortgage they can afford, what they should do, what are some things you usually kind of like to educate people on maybe costs or things that they don't really think of?
A lot of people don't understand the tax situation with it. One is a lot of people put that, yes, all your taxes are going to be, what you're paying in real estate taxes are going to be written off kind of
Mhm.
thing. So you're going to get a tax savings. But as you know from yourself, is if you're not meeting that standard deduction, like that tax is kind of a wash kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
So
That's one thing that kind of gets under my skin sometimes when people talk about great reasons to own a home. Yeah, all the deductions you can get from owning the home. Usually the cost of the loan, the insurance you're paying as well. But yeah, like you said, if you don't meet the threshold of the standard deduction with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 was almost pretty much doubled. So for like a married couple, if you're not meeting that, which is, I forget off the top of my head what it is for this year, but it's like $26,000.
mhm.
If all your itemized deductions aren't above that, that's actually not doing anything for you having the home ownership deductions you could potentially take. Now, it doesn't mean it's like worthless. It is building up that queue of deductions that eventually, if you build it up and then get it above the standard deduction, it would make sense to itemize. But it's still, and it's sometimes when people are trying to sell someone a house or give them reasons to buy if they're on the fence, that's one thing that people drop on people a lot is a good reason. And to me, it's like that's just bad advice. Like that's kind of a half, it's not untrue, but it's a half truth.
Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of a half truth. People don't understand it fully, and it's not like they're ill intent by giving out that information. They just don't understand it, like exactly what it means. What they're so that's kind of one big thing that I see with a lot of people. Are like, oh, tax benefits from owning a home. Like, technically, yes, there's tax benefits, but
Mm.
it doesn't mean you can actually use them, kind of thing.
Right. And the thing a lot of people don't bring into account a lot too when they're talking about a home is all the costs that go into it. I know generally if we talk between renting versus owning, yeah, usually the costs that the owner of the home has gets passed on to their renters. But still, the renter would have more flexibility. Like for instance, we just in my house last week, our air conditioning died. And here in South Florida, that's pretty much a no-go. So we basically had to drop $6,000 we weren't expecting to replace our AC. And that's the type of stuff that over the years, the maintenance and the insurance and the taxes and all that starts adding up. So when people are looking at like that example we mentioned before, where if they bought the house at $500,000 and 10 years later they sell it for $1 million, they think they made a $500,000 there, but they didn't. Most people, at least, don't factor in those maintenance, the taxes, the insurance, the HOA fees that go in, and all just kind of also the mental costs that come along with those types of things that happen. If you're having to have an out of the blue cost, that causes stress and issues as well, as opposed to those are just the things really that people don't factor in that I always like to at least get thrown out there for people to at least understand when they're making their decisions.
Exactly. We'll have a couple of people come to us and they're like, okay, hey, I'm tired of renting. I want to buy. And you're like, okay, why? What's the real, pain point in here? Because yeah, you could just continue your rent kind of thing. Hey, my rent went up, $600-700 a month. Okay, well, maybe that's your pain point. Like, buying a home, your monthly payment over the years could be more stable and predictable. So that side of it can be an investment to you where you're like, okay, I know exactly what I'm paying, throughout. Where on a rental, your lease ends in the next 2 months and they suddenly hit you with a bill and say, hey, you
Right.
want to stay here? It's another $600 a month. And we've been seeing that a lot lately. So those are kind of things that people need to look out for when they're deciding if they are going to buy, because that is part of it.
So would you say that's one of the biggest reasons you're seeing people coming to talk to you about buying a house is they're tired of like the instability and not knowing?
Partly, yeah, their first time. That is a biggest thing you do see. They're just tired of paying that landlord the rent, so they want that investment. But like we were saying before, it depends on your time frame. How long are you going to be there?
Mhm.
Because realistically, to get, you know, let's say value out of just owning, it takes a couple of years.
Right.
Granted, we had a crazy market in 21 and in 2021 and kind of slowed down in 22, where values kind of skyrocketed. That was, once in a lifetime ordeal kind of thing. So usually we see around 3 to 7% increase. So if you think about that, it's going to take you 2 to 3 years before it would make sense to walk away from a home to sell it,
Mhm.
if nothing else changes in your life kind of thing.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. it also kind of leads into the next point I wanted to talk about. Was a lot of times when I'm working with folks, we're figuring out their net worth, we're figuring out all their financial statements and where they're actually sitting in their life currently financially. One of the biggest assets, obviously, most people have, like we talked about before, is their primary home. And what that can do sometimes is, if you've had a decent amount of appreciation, it can show a pretty substantial net worth. I can think of people who I've worked with who their net worth is at about $1 million, but they kind of get a little tricked into a sense of security that maybe isn't there, because what they're not seeing or maybe appreciating early on is 70 to 80% of their net worth is that primary house. And if we're talking about building toward a financial goal, like retirement, obviously being the one that most people have, so it's like the common denominator, or an education goal, or vacation goal or something, that is not a place you can pull the money from easily. And because people view it as an investment, a lot of times they think, oh, I've got $1 million net worth, I'm sitting pretty, when in reality they may be still behind the 8 ball when it comes to planning for their future, but they get lulled into a false sense of security that then they could be not taking action in the short term they needing to be taking in order to secure the long term for themselves. So that's why I try to, when I talk with folks, I try to bring across the point that it's a use asset and not really an investment. And if you focus on it that way, it can really help kind of change your mindset in a positive manner. Because I think we were talking earlier before we started recording about some stuff out there. You remember we were talking about reverse mortgages and stuff, and that could maybe, if your assets are tied up in your primary home, some stuff it could open you up from some less scrupulous
Exactly.
people.
I mean, so at least with me, reverse mortgages are the only ones that we actually get paid differently on. There's a big payout for those. They do take a long time. There's a lot of paperwork that the borrower has to go through, and just to see if they qualify for it, first of all. And they have to understand what's basically happening is you're going to get payments every month from the equity that's in your home, but there are people that will purposely target that. Now, it can make sense for you, if that is your case, but it's something I always tell people. There's a couple of loan officers in my office that, over 20 years in the business, never done one.
Yeah. Wow.
It's not, I mean, it can be a great loan if you need it, but if you're planning your life accordingly, like you said, it's a used asset. So the equity that's built into the house is more of a bonus that once you sell it, or pass it to your kids or whatever the case is, then it actually is needed to be as you're not using it as a bank.
Right.
That's not what it's meant for, kind of
right
thing.
Can you talk about how a reverse mortgage actually works and why they may not be such a great idea so much? Because usually when I hear reverse mortgage, the hairs on the back of my neck start standing up. So I'm a little biased, but I'd like to hear from you what you think of that stuff.
To me, a reverse mortgage, anytime I've had a client that wanted to do one, we usually just did a cash out refi for them. But on a reverse mortgage, as I was saying before, you're starting to get, instead of paying the bank, the bank is paying you on the equity, but they're also going to be owning that property afterwards, kind of thing. So, if your family's set up where, hey, my kids are good, everything is good afterwards, and you want to just pull extra money out of it because you're going to sell it, they're going to sell it once you pass away, can be very good with it. There is definitely, for the loan officer that writes it, there's a big premium for them to write that, just because of the details of the work that goes in there. To me personally, it's something that I don't really dive into because it's rarely needed. If somebody is tapping into that situation, they're usually a lot worse off than they think. So they might not actually even qualify for it. That's the other part of it.
Okay.
A lot of people, you definitely have to own that home for a long time. But what I've seen lately with it is, since we had such a huge equity jump in our houses, people are starting to get more curious about it. But especially if they start seeing the stock market kind of go down, so it's like, oh, where am I going to pull this money from? They're going to try to pull it from their house, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Once they realize, like, okay, well, the bank's going to own that house afterwards, they kind of start backing away from it.
Yeah. I mean, I think in certain situations, in my mind, they're pretty rare, but in certain situations, they can make sense.
Yes,
Like a
it's a
reverse
fallback
mortgage.
plan.
But
It's not something you plan. You don't buy a house and say, hey, in 25, 30 years, I'm going to use a reverse mortgage to pull money right now.
right. Yeah, whenever we're doing planning, or at least I do with clients for the future, we completely exclude the equity in the house usually when we're doing the initial swag on the plan, because like, hey, we want to figure out a path to get there without having to do that. Because if you've got kids or or whatever, you might want to pass that on down the road. You don't want it to go to the bank. And in my mind, a lot of times too, it's kind of a better use if you have a big home, you have a lot of equity built into it. Maybe the kids are out of the house, you've retired. A lot of people would rather just downsize at that point. And that's kind of a better way to get the equity out of the house if you don't need it anymore. At least I feel like. Yes. And then you can get a smaller house. Then you maybe got a few $100,000 in equity out of it that you could put into trying to grow, or at least get some sort of income to help fund your retirement at that point. So to me, there's definitely a few things in the order of operations that would be ahead of something like that. But you also mentioned one thing to me I thought was interesting. What's the payout difference between a normal mortgage and a reverse mortgage?
So we usually get paid around 1% to 1.5%, depending on the LO's comp that they're getting, and then on reverse mortgages they almost pay out up to 15%. So like, yeah, it's
that's insane.
It's a crazy difference with it, and that's the only types of loans that we get paid differently on. But it is a complete kind of craziness that you see in that spread right there.
Yeah, it almost makes you wonder sometimes. A lot of the advertisements and stuff you see pushing stuff like reverse mortgages are maybe not so altruistic in their reasoning.
Yeah,
if that's the pay you're getting on it, it's look for the incentive.
That's what we see. Yeah, so that's what you have to focus on. What it can happen where that's your best option. So it's honestly coming down and sit with somebody that's going to lay all the options out for you, and so you understand them, and then you decide yourself which one is the best for you. If somebody's just giving you one option only, when I always tell people, if there's only one option, look around, talk to other people about it. It might be the only option for you, but you definitely, besides selling, but look at it, kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to really start thinking about your primary home not as an investment, but like I said, as a use asset, or if you want to call it something else, fine. But just don't think of it as a piggy bank that's growing for you over the years. Yeah. It can do that, but
that's not its primary reason. Primary reason is a roof over your head, a place for your family where you're going to sleep at night, kind of thing. That's what the home is meant for.
Right. And even if you're doing the math and over, let's say 10 years, maybe you've lost money on the house. If you build out, okay, I bought it at this, I sold it at this, and I'm calculating in the maintenance, the taxes, insurance, all that. Even if you lose a little bit of money, that's okay, because if it's providing the service that you need, which is that primary shelter, the stability, a home to maybe grow your family in, and the emotional attachments you could build to things. Those are all things that are not monetary, that a primary home definitely provides to you. So it's one of those things that's kind of tough when you really start looking at it to look at just in a pure dollars and cents mindset. I mean, you might make a bunch of money off of it, or you might actually lose money over the years on it, but that shouldn't be the thing that's driving all your decisions. It's all the other things that aren't easily broken down on a spreadsheet that I think people need to be aware of when they are assessing their primary home.
Exactly. Yeah, you're not buying it solely to build wealth in, kind of thing.
Right. Because I've seen, no, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, there are ways of building wealth through real estate. Yes, that is true.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not saying that you can't build investments in it, kind of thing. But what we have to watch out for is more of you're not buying that house to live in. We're talking about your primary home to just hopefully in 20, 30 years, it's not a retirement account for you.
Right.
That's your worst case scenario, that you've lived there for so long that everything else has failed, that's when you're going to use it.
Right.
It's there as a fallback for that situation, but it's not there for you as your primary goal of buying a home.
Right. And that could be an indicator if you're 20 years down the road and the only thing that you really have any sort of significant value in is your primary home. It probably means you couldn't really afford it in the first place 20 years ago. You bought maybe too much house. You put you made it so that so much of your monthly income is going into servicing the home that it didn't leave you any extra to put into some sort of other savings vehicle that you're looking to grow for retirement, either your
Yeah.
401k or IRA. So that's why, like, to me, I think it's so important to view your primary home as a use asset as opposed to an investment, because then you're hopefully narrowing in a more effective manner on, all right, here's how much I should really pay per month for my mortgage. Here's how much it's really maybe lower than I thought. And that extra delta goes to something else that's hopefully growing at a better rate over the decades than your home would.
Exactly. So the first question I usually even ask in, new people that are coming to me is, what is your monthly budget? Not how much home do you want? Like, what is your monthly budget? Because that's what we're going to go off of. We're going to work backwards off of, hey, I want to pay $2,500 a month. Okay, we bump it up a little bit to 26 because are you going to let your house walk away for $100 a month? No, you're probably not going to let that walk away. Don't go to Starbucks, 10 times a month, or don't eat out once a month, kind of thing. Like you can sacrifice that, but once you have that monthly budget in mind, you might be pre-approved for 4,000 a month, but you want to stay in that 25, 26 range, then that's what we're going to be showing you, kind of thing.
Right.
We'll tell you, like, yeah, you can stretch it, but you know what you're comfortable with per month, kind of thing.
How often do you have to talk people off the ledge of them wanting to actually buy a house at the tippy top range of what they're pre-approved for?
It happens a lot more than people think it does, kind of thing. Especially with a first-time home buyer, they just want, sad to say, if they haven't come to me first, they just like, oh, I'm pre-approved for 400,000 or 500,000, but they really are comfortable with maybe a $350,000 home, kind of thing, that payment range. So sometimes people, it's like your eyes get too big for your stomach, kind of thing, and you have to take that into account. What you can be pre-approved for and actually close on might be different than what we tell people is, like, you don't want to be house broke. You don't want to just buy a house and like, okay, well, now I'm just going to sit here for the next 30 years because I can't do anything else, kind of thing.
Yeah. Now, I know you work with a lot of realtors. Obviously, that's part of your business.
Yes.
I know when you're talking to the ones that you work with, they can't really give financial advice, but they can kind of nudge people they're working with in a certain direction. So is that the same type of guidance you give to realtors about, hey, if you're talking about what they can afford versus what they're approved for when you're showing them around houses?
Exactly. Yep. What would we want to stay in their budget? So I always tell the realtor, like, yeah, this is kind of where they want to stay budget wise. Like, if there is a perfect home, they have to realize, like, if it's a little bit more, like, hey, if it meets all the boxes that I want, they might be willing to sacrifice that money to buy something more. But their ultimate goal is to stay in this little window of, this is what I want to do a month. This is where I'm at in my life. This is what I'm comfortable with, because people don't realize is, yes, you might be pre-approved for so much more, but we don't take into account water, electric, cable, cell phone. Those aren't things on your credit report. So we don't have to take that into account of your debt to income ratio. So once you start adding those things in there, your monthly expenses can add up very quickly.
Changes the equation pretty quick.
Yes.
Yeah. Nobody likes surprises like that.
No, not at all.
So yeah, I know probably one of the worst feelings somebody can have is if they're all happy, they buy their first home or buy a new home, they think it's great, and then within the next 6 months they think, oh man, this was a mistake.
Yeah,
this is so much more expensive than I thought. I'm barely affording this. I can't even go out to eat because everything's going toward the house and all the expenses that go for it. So
yep.
So yeah, I think, like, in summary, those are just great reasons why, if you start really changing your mindset on seeing your primary home as an asset, not an investment, hopefully it starts kind of making the wheels in your mind move a little bit different in a better, more realistic fashion.
Exactly. Yeah. It's definitely not just your piggy bank. It's always a cherry on top that once you sell the home, you can walk away with a decent amount of money. But again, that's because the value of real estate is going to appreciate, because exact things that we're talking about, you have to live somewhere. Yeah. You can't, I mean, I guess you can live under a bridge, but you're having a family that you have to live somewhere. So that value, it's always going to be wanted, kind of thing.
Yeah. The bridge is a possibility, but maybe not ideal.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think good chat, Stephen. I think this is good things to talk about for stuff that we hope people would learn, or the earlier the better.
Yes.
These types of things. So good chat. So yeah, thanks for listening to our first episode, folks. So if you have any topics or things you want us to address in future episodes, go ahead and reach out to us. Our Stephen and I's contact info, we'll have it below in the show notes. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Say bye, Stephen.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.